In the last episode, our survivors crash-landed on a strange alien planet, stuck between a huge mountain range and the ocean. To survive, they decided to venture through the fungus-filled caves, finding all sorts of fungi. Many were edible, and many were useful for other means. Along the way, they formed bonds with each other, as well as with wild insects they dubbed bovine beetles, which helped them carry their heavy load through the rest of the fungal-filled caves. Finally, upon exiting the caves, the team explored the world, coming across a number of strange, inhospitable biomes. However, after days of searching, the team found somewhere that looked like Earth-like grassland, and so the crew settled down to make a permanent base here, in order to find a way to get rescued, as well as to prepare for the winter was coming. The place they decided to settle down was a fairly safe one. There was water for drinking and sanitation, Earth-like berry bushes they could eat, as well as Earth-like trees that they could harvest for its wood. The mountain provided plenty of resource, including copper and iron, and a small patch of Ashlander biome also provided decent resources. The crew set up their stockpile in the ruins of an abandoned building, and decided to make this the first building of their base. In the early hours of the following day, the team planned out an extensive pen for the bovine beetles. This will keep them safe from predators, and stop them wandering away and getting lost. But it wasn't long before the stress and anger caught up to Buck, and she went on a rampage, deciding to slaughter as many of the bovine beetles as she could. However, Aliona decided to set her straight, and with some good negotiation skills, Aliona managed to settle Buck down. A few days later, the bovine beetles had their pen, the team had their warehouse and tent set up, as well as a basic latrine and bowl of water. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The team then started harvesting some nearby materials, iron, copper, and coal, so that they could make a stone cutting bench and start making stone brick walls straight away. The team then excavated the hill north of the warehouse, and by the beginning of the next day, they had planned out their bedrooms and the start of their base, what was to be their home for the considerable future. The three of them then worked hard in unison, mining, constructing, and cutting the stone chunks into blocks. They all wanted to make this base the best it could be. However, once again, Buck had a mental break, and started to pig out on the little food that they had left in their supplies. Moods were generally fairly low due to the ugly environment and a lack of recreation, so Aliona made a horseshoes pin so that the three of them could enjoy some form of recreation, even if it was extremely basic. Feeling a bit better amongst themselves, the three carried on building their bedrooms, and for once, they all got along together, happy to finally be getting somewhere with their base. However, as Aliona strived to try and finish the base off, the local Guar had gone mad. The three of them and Brutus took it out without much issue, and then butchered it up for some tasty meals for the morning. And it wasn't long before the bedrooms were finally complete. Yes, they were scruffy, yes, the floor was bare, but it was something, and it was a big step up from sleeping in tents outside. With their warehouse full, they decided to start setting up shelves and attempt to store their stuff more neatly and efficiently. Instead of wasting resources making flooring for their bedrooms, the crew decided to just smooth the rough stone. Yes, it would take more time, but they were low on resources at this point, and they needed to save as much as possible for the coming days. Now that they got their bedroom set up, it was finally time to get stuck into some research. So they decided to build a simple research bench and filing cabinet adjacent to their bedrooms. They had a lot to research before they would be able to figure out a way off this planet, and so the sooner they started, the better. With those set up, it was time to focus on their food and use some of the seeds they'd been hoarding up till now. The crew laid out a makeshift greenhouse in which they'd use heaters and glass panes to keep their precious seeds and earth-like plants safe. They also made a seed bench so they would always have a surplus of seeds, just in case. The team also wanted to make a fueled smelter so they could make this glass and smelt down scrap metal, but for that they needed more steel. They decided to scrap all of the nearby wrecks that they could find, in the hopes that they would be able to secure enough steel to make the fueled smeltery. Whilst they didn't have enough steel for a smeltery, they did have enough for a smithy. The smithy wouldn't be able to process scrap steel, but at the very least, it would be able to make them glass panes. The team also built an iron tailor bench. They could finally start processing some of the devil strand and fleece that they'd been saving up till now. And with winter being upon them soon, they saw it fit to make toques and parkas, ready for the colder weather to arrive. On day 36, the bovine beetle larvae had finally hatched from their eggs. There were dozens of baby grubs nestled amongst the seeds and resources in their warehouse. Kivy, normally the animal lover, sat this one out, while Buck struggled to pull them all into the pen. At this point, Brutus was the only animal for Kivy. Just when things were starting to settle into a routine, a transport pod came crashing down near the base. Inside, a man who called himself Agent. Buck ran over, quickly rescuing him, and patched him up as best she could. He was a 21-year-old former government agent, and someone who claimed that he was amongst the crew on the Hermes. He explained that he too had only just woken up from cryosleep, but something had gone wrong with his transport pod, and he'd been injured in the process. The crew had no reason not to believe him. It was the first other human they'd seen for over a month, and they were just glad and hopeful that there were more survivors out there like Agent. Aliona decided to use some of the spare bricks lying around to make Agent a makeshift bedroom. Even if he didn't want to stay, they could use it for something else in the future. Aliona also decided to start crafting some specialized tools that they could use for gathering resources, like a pickaxe that Buck could use for mining. When Agent was finally strong enough to stand on his own 2 feet, he stated to the group that he wanted to join them, and they welcomed him with open arms. Shortly after Agent had agreed to stay, another person appeared over the horizon, someone calling himself Reginald. He too claimed to be a survivor of the Hermes, and after seeing Agent's transport pod crash, he'd made his way to the colony. The crew also accepted Reginald with open arms. Another pair of hands would help immensely in getting themselves prepared for the winter. And whilst they're finishing off the final touches of the new bedroom, they also hurried to try and get the greenhouse sorted, as their food supplies were quickly dwindling. The next day, the greenhouse was finished, and they set up growing zones so they'd be able to grow their earth-like crops of rice and potatoes. Not only were these a good food source, but it was also a taste of home, and it'll keep their spirits high as the days went on. On day 39, the first real threat attacked the colony, a small army of boom rats. The first one appeared out of nowhere, attacking Buck without warning. Buck managed to fight it off with serious burns, which eventually downed her from the pain. The crew managed to take them out without too much of an issue, but Agent, being a pyromaniac, as soon as he saw the fire, snapped and decided to use the opportunity to light more fires. The group forgave him. He'd had a hard time recently, and he was struggling to come to terms with this situation. Luckily, the team were able to keep it under control, and thankfully, Buck's wounds were mostly superficial. Kivy and Buck spent the day trying to round up all the bovine beetles that escaped during the boom rat attack. Luckily, they were all accounted for at the end of the day. The next day, the crew finally found their feet. Aliona was busy planting crops, Reginald was busy smoothing the floors, Agent busy with research, Buck busy with mining, and Kivy busy with her animals. They worked in perfect harmony throughout the day. With the stockpile full to the brim, the team decided to build more shelves to help keep it all organised. And just when they'd finished doing so, a manhunter pack appeared over the horizon. This time, a pack of manhunting cougar. The team quickly lined up, ready to take them on. Agent, equipped with a single poison dart, attempted to help out the team with their range attack, but he failed spectacularly, and in doing so, was at the mercy of the cougars. Thankfully, they all got through in one piece, but Agent and Buck were severely injured in the process. However, by the end of the day, they were both healed up, but they just prayed that neither would get an infection from their wounds. However, the next morning, their worst fears came to light, as Agent had got an infection in his torso. Buck, being as stubborn as ever, decided to treat Agent despite her wounds obviously hindering her abilities. She claimed she was fine, but her attempt to heal him was subpar at best. A minor earthquake in the night scared the group, but thankfully, it looked like no major damage had occurred. The field kitchen was hit worst of all, but thankfully, it was still in a repairable condition. The only other damage was some minor cracks to the brick wall of their warehouse. With Buck still injured, Reginald attempted to heal Agent in her place. Thankfully, he did a much better job than Buck, and it was clear that Agent would pull through from his infection. With their increased numbers, the group knew they needed to increase their food supply, and so they added an extension onto their greenhouse. This side would be dedicated to growing mushrooms from the seeds they had scavenged from the fungal caves. Whilst the building work got underway, they were alerted to 3 chunks of spaceship that fell out of the sky and landed nearby. They weren't sure if these were from the Hermes, but regardless, they contained plenty of industrial components and steel that they would be able to use in later projects. And after deconstructing all of them, it was clear that they would now have enough steel to build the fueled smeltery, which would in turn help them gain more steel from all the slag chunks that landed here over time. The fueled smeltery would also allow them to make steel directly from charcoal or coal and the iron that they can mine from the mountains nearby. Doing so would allow them a steady supply of steel, so they shouldn't ever have to worry again, as long as they were conservative with their resources. By the end of the day, the extension to the greenhouse had been completed. The only problem was the sudden drop in temperature, and they're worried at this rate their crops simply wouldn't survive. So on day 44, it was clear something needed to change. They needed to somehow heat their base. There are many options for this, but all of them required steel. After Reginald salvaged some steel from some scrap, the team were able to make an electric heater for their greenhouse. They then finally set up their portable wood generator and battery, enabling them to start the process of powering their base. Unfortunately, that was when the colony experienced its first loss. A bovine pupa, which was somehow outside of the animal pen, was attacked by a warg, a huge muscly wolf-like creature. The pupa, sadly, never stood a chance, and was killed almost instantly. But the pupa's death was only the start of their problems. A roar was heard in the distance, the sound of some ferocious predator, presumably lured over by the blood of the bovine pupa. With haste, the colonists quickly lined up outside the warehouse, ready to take on whatever followed. A large Arctic lion appeared out of the shadows, hungry and ready to kill. The team jumped out of the warehouse, hoping to catch it by surprise, and as quickly as they could, put the beast down. Reginald and Aliona suffered some minor wounds in the process, but after being patched up, both of them were fine. Aliona, despite her injuries, loaded the generator with wood to finally start heating the base. It wasn't long before the temperature was back up to a reasonable level. The crops were safe for another day. With the temperature of the greenhouse now at a reasonable level, the team had more time to focus on research. Whilst there were a few things the team would like to work on, they were desperately short on wood, and where they were based only grew a handful of trees which were able to be used to power the wood generator. So they decided to research tree sowing, in the hopes that they'll be able to start a tree farm of their own to power their generator. With the bovine beetle pen full to bursting, the nutrition grown in the pen unable to support many more, and with their food supply still low, the team decided that they would start eating the fertilized bovine beetle eggs. This would help keep their population down, as well as giving the team some much needed protein in their diets. Finally, after days of waiting, the first crop of rice was ready to harvest. Whilst this first crop would be used solely for seed production, it was comforting to know that they were able to grow rice, even in winter here. Just seeing the rice harvested gave them all hope that they would be able to eke out an existence here, whilst waiting to be rescued. The team also planted grey ladies, timber shrooms, mortal morel, starch stalks, and baleful bullets in the mushroom greenhouse, hoping to add to their food stores and resources for survival. Another day and another boom rat attack, with Buck on another mental break. Thankfully, Aliona was there once again to take care of the boom rat, and also bring Buck to her senses. With Buck being rescued once again, and Agent making breakfast, all seemed right with the colony. That was until a large piece of ancient ship crashed near to the colony. The colonists had heard stories of the dawn of space exploration, and the ancient vessels that went missing in outer space. Judging from the markings on this piece of ship, it must have been one of those vessels. However, they could hear scratching and growling emanating from inside. The crew were unsure what to do with this piece of crashed ship, emanating rot stink gas. They decided the best course of action was to give it a wide berth. There was no need to risk a fight. Ignoring the crashed ship, Reginald decided to process some of the devil strand and fleece that the group had gathered in the fungal caves. But being outside and tailoring in the dark and the rain wasn't exactly pleasant. So they decided to extend the base once again, making 2 new bedrooms and use the rest of the space as a crafting room, with the plan to move the smithy and the smeltery into this room as well. However, once again, building work was cut short due to a new threat, one they hadn't experienced before. A group of monstrous human-like abominations, their bodies ravaged by thick keratin spines, were running towards the colony. The crew had no idea what these things were. If they were once human, they had been warped and changed to be almost unrecognizable. But the team were used to attacks at this point and quickly lined up, ready for the attack. Kivy at long range took the first few shots, slowing and even downing one of them before they even had chance to get to the main group. It was clear, however, that these monstrosities also had a ranged attack. But it didn't take long once the rest of the group appeared to gun them down. Kivy was the only one who had taken any damage, stab wounds from the spines thrown at her by the monsters. They had no idea what these creatures were, but they all knew that they were dangerous. And the group as a whole agreed to finish them off so that they would never rise again. With the rainstorm over and the enemies defeated, Reginald focused on making some much needed winter clothing for the colony, using brittle chitin from the butchered bovine grubs. It wasn't the warmest material, but they had nothing else. Aliona then worked hard to finish off the extension to the base, and by nightfall, she'd finished constructing the extension, ready for everyone in the colony to have a decent bed to sleep in, as well as for a muffalo to go mad outside, which Kivy quickly dispatched and Aliona butchered, ready for breakfast the next morning. On day 51, it was clear that the group desperately needed more recreation, and also somewhere nice to sit down and eat. And so they planned an outside dining area, something to lift everyone's spirits and encourage social interaction. Most of the group got on socially, but Buck was still the outcast. Kivy especially had an extremely low opinion of Buck. After being insulted again and again, she'd had enough of her and actively saw Buck as her rival. This was the same amongst all the colonists. No one particularly liked Buck, her regular mental breaks, and her harsh attitude towards everyone else. Despite the social difficulties, they had managed to collect a huge amount of rice seeds, so much so that any excess rice could now go into their food stores. Finally, they would be able to enjoy a taste of home. It was just in time too, as the first potato crop was just about to come in for harvest. Once again though, they were cut short. The rest of the Muffalo pack outside their base had also gone mad, and were actively targeting Agent, who was nearby harvesting plants. Agent ran for his life as the rest of the team ran to help him, attempting to gun down the Muffalo before they fatally injured Agent. Luckily they were able to do this before things got too serious, and Aliona butchered them up for a good amount of Muffalo pelt that they could use for warmer winter clothing. As the never-ending quest for more resources continued, the team once again had to expand their shelving, and it was at this point a new enemy reared its ugly head. Giant insects, unlike those they'd seen before, emerged from a black hive from the ground. Heavily armoured and vicious looking, they ran towards the colony. The group lined up and easily took care of the first one that had appeared, a small scarab-like creature. But the larger, more deadly insect had a ranged attack that proved both deadly as well as toxic. Brutus helped them all by taking the brunt of the blows, but still, it was a long shootout before the giant insect took its last breath. Bruised and battered, the team made their way back, hoping that this never-ending cycle of brutality would ease up soon. On day 55, there was a monsoon. High winds and rain battered the base, but their stockpile was now looking better than ever, with all of their resources organised fairly neatly. With a boom rat suddenly acting friendly towards the group, the team thought their luck had turned around. They thought maybe it was the end to the hostile environment. How wrong they were. Whilst the boom rat may have been friendly, the pack of timberwolves following it was definitely not. And they rushed towards the base with bloodthirsty howls. The colony saw the wolves as too deadly and decided, instead of trying to take them head on, that they would lock the doors and wait for them to move on to other prey. And so, with the wolves literally knocking on the door, the crew of the Hermes tried their best to keep the day-to-day activities of the colony running. The mushroom greenhouse was having its first harvest and was proving to be a useful addition to the colony. However, the self-tamed boom rat was not, and Kivy thought it best to put the animal down before it became a hazard. And so, trapped indoors, the colony carried on as normal, focusing as much on research as they could to try and pass the days away. Aliona even built Buck a bonsai pot, a sort of peace offering that she hoped would make Buck more tolerable to be around. And it worked somewhat, with Buck's opinion of most of the group improved. And Buck had even attempted to try and mend her relationship with Kivy by having some deep talks with her. Despite it not being particularly effective, Kivy's opinion of Buck had improved somewhat, and they all hoped that the negativity could be put behind them. When one threat ended, another began, and with the wolves gone, it was now the boom rat's turn to attack the base, with multiple groups attacking from all fronts. The crew didn't want to risk injury, and so remained locked indoors, waiting now for the boom rats to leave them alone. With everyone's moods low, a poker table was seen as a good investment, as a good recreation source. They also planned out some skylights for their new crafting/recreation room. But being trapped inside for days on end had consequences, with Reginald getting into not one, but 2 social fights with other members of the colony. Being trapped indoors was starting to get to them, as well as the fact they had no access to fresh water whilst trapped inside the base. The next morning, the boom rats had all finally dispersed, and the team realised they needed to bring their outside facilities inside for cases like this. So they decided to split the crafting room into a crafting room/mess hall for the time being, and they swapped round the walls and doors to the latrine so that it was accessible from inside rather than outside. Finally, the group now had everything they needed in case they needed to lock themselves in again. Day 60, an agent made full use of the new poker table, enjoying his time immensely despite playing on his own, giving him the motivation he needed to keep researching tree sowing throughout the day, whilst the rest of the colony continued their day-to-day operations. But research wasn't the only thing that Agent was getting motivated to do. And during his break, he finally plucked up the courage to tell Kivy how he really felt about her. And so Kivy and Agent began a relationship with each other. Kivy then moved herself into Agent's new room, and realizing how dark the bedroom was, they planned to put skylights in all of the rooms to make the base less dark and dreary, and attempt to raise their spirits even more. However, something unexpected happened in the early hours of the morning. The first night Kivy and Agent shared a room together, Kivy became pregnant. This was something neither of the two anticipated, but it thrilled Kivy all the same. However, a baby was a double-edged sword for the colony. Yes, it would bring hope and happiness to the couple, but it would hinder them if they needed to travel quickly, escape the planet, or deal with threats inside the colony. They would all need to plan accordingly if they wanted this new baby to survive and thrive with them. But as the weekly boom rat went mad outside, and Aliona quickly dealt with it, the group reflected on how far they'd come in the last few weeks. They'd expanded the base, they'd got 2 new colonists, with a 3rd on the way. Things were looking up for them, and although they were no nearer being rescued, they hoped and prayed that things would only get better from here. So thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you've liked what you've seen, please leave a like and subscribe. A massive thank you to all my YouTube members and Patreons: Clint, David, Len, Valise, Lord Me Lord, T Chaos, Toolman, Nacho Cheese, Mikey Soundtrack, King of Thorns, Skylar Birchwell, Charles, Mint Salad, Lats, Brian, Heretic, Fabio, and Codry Pierce. Cheers, guys, and I will see you next episode. Bye-bye.